Welcome to episode 247 of the Selling Your Screenplay podcast. I'm Ashley Scott Myers, screenwriter and blogger over at sellingyourscreenplay.com. Today I'm interviewing writer, director, producer, editor, and actor Josh Folan. He's a real do-it-yourself filmmaker who's out there making things happen. It's another great example of someone who's just hustling like mad and having some real success too. So stay tuned for that interview. If you find this episode valuable, please help me out by giving me a review in iTunes or leaving a comment on YouTube or retweeting the podcast on Twitter or liking or sharing it on Facebook. These social media shares really do help spread word about the podcast, so they're very much appreciated. Any websites or links that I mention in the podcast can be found on my blog in the show notes. I also publish a transcript with every episode in case you'd rather read the show or look at something later on. You can find all the podcast show notes at www.sellingyourscreenplay.com/podcast, and then just look for episode number 247. If you want my free guide, How to Sell a Screenplay in 5 Weeks, you can pick that up by going to sellingyourscreenplay.com/guide. It's completely free. You just put in your email address and I'll send you a new lesson once per week for 5 weeks, along with a bunch of bonus lessons. I teach the whole process of how to sell your screenplay in that guide. I'll teach you how to write a professional logline and query letter and how to find agents, managers, and producers who are looking for material. Really is everything you need to know to sell your screenplay. Just go to sellingyourscreenplay.com/guide. So now let's get into the main segment. Today I'm interviewing writer, director, producer, editor, and actor Josh Folan. Here is the interview. Welcome, Josh, to the Selling Your Screenplay podcast. I really appreciate you coming on the show with me today.
My pleasure, man. Thank you for having me.
So to start out, maybe you can tell us a little bit about your background. Where did you grow up and how did you get interested in the entertainment business?
I grew up in Ohio, which is not exactly a breeding ground. Well, maybe it is actually a breeding ground for entertainment people, but it certainly wasn't on the radar of things to do when I was little. I grew up near Cleveland, this little town called Oberlin. Some people have heard of the college. There's also a small town there. Mm-hmm. I went to Ohio State, so I was down in Columbus for 5 years, and then I went to school for finance. So business was where the trajectory I was on. And I had done little modeling stuff through college, local entertainment magazines, jewelry ads, whatever. And some pictures got to an agent in New York right around when I was finishing school. And I flew out there, met with them, stayed for a couple weeks. I had a buddy that lived in Hell's Kitchen in Manhattan, and that went okay. So there was like a 6-month stint where I was working for a firm, a finance firm back in Ohio, in Columbus, Ohio, and flying out for a week or two a month to New York to do that shit. Mm-hmm. And it went okay, and my lease ran up in my apartment back in Ohio, and I hated what I was doing for that firm. I was working as a financial advisor. I can give you a long, boring story about that, but I'll spare you. And decided, what the hell, you're only young once, and literally went in on a Saturday, stacked all my client files up my boss's desk, letter thanking her for everything, left the keys, drove to New York for that stuff. So yeah, I was there for a couple months.
And let me ask you a couple questions about that, because I know that's a decision. I was an accounting major in college, so a similar trajectory. And I'd be curious to get your thoughts on making that break. I mean, did you get pushback from your parents? Presumably, they probably helped you through college. They spent all this money on this finance degree, and now you're just headed off to New York. Your friends probably were rolling their eyes. I mean, and I'm just speaking from experience here, because that's what my friends were doing. I say, I'm just going to Hollywood. So maybe you can talk about that. Like, how did you get through that? Did you question your decision, and sort of what was your thought process? Because I know there's people listening to this podcast that are probably in that similar situation.
I mean, I was in kind of I didn't really, I don't know, it's hard to describe. I didn't really have a lot of pushback or anything. I was already kind of, I don't know, my parents are my aunt and uncle, and they're basically, that's not my mom and dad, and I'm not close to my dad. My mom's not around anymore. So I don't really have this parental unit governing me, or I didn't by then. Mm-hmm. So yeah, my aunt and uncle are kind of parental figures, and like, I can rely on them, but they're not bearing down on me. They're not trying to steer me in any direction. They were just kind of like, okay, that's what you're doing. That's interesting. Where'd that come from? And yeah, so I mean, I didn't really have anyone. I mean, certainly my friends talk shit, but you know what? If you have good friends, they should be talking shit to you for whatever you're doing. So I really honestly didn't get a lot of pushback on it, and maybe I honestly, if I had, maybe I wouldn't have done it, and honestly, that's kind of, I'm thankful that I didn't have that and didn't have to overcome that, because it was just kind of I don't like this opportunity presented itself. It gets me out of Ohio. That's probably a plus. So why not go try it and see what happens, you know? So it was very kind of whimsical, I suppose. It wasn't, there wasn't a long lead time on the decision for people to give me flack, really.
Yeah. And that's part of just being young. You kind of have those opportunities to try. So pick up your story there. So you moved to New York. You've got some modeling gigs. And then how did you transition to acting? How did you transition from modeling to acting?
Yeah, so I was there for just a couple months, and I booked something for Comedy Central that was like a half modeling, half acting job. That got me an agent. I took some classes. I studied William Esper Studios for a while. Took some other classes, Penny Templeton, some on-camera stuff. And not too far into that, I booked a role on one of the soaps, All My Children. That was like a reoccurring kind of day player deal. Not a contract role every day or anything that changes your life, but it was probably 40-some episodes over a 3-year span, and just that initial thing kind of got me a little bit of legitimacy, and got me the agent was able to send me out and get me auditions, and so that got the acting thing going, and like, okay, that got me into the entertainment industry. But that over the last 13 years is kind of become a very backseat thing to making my own stuff, and that opportunity presented itself. I was working on that soap, and one of the other guys on there, he and I started a little theater company where we were producing little off-Broadway shows with the important soap people that were not us, the contract players, the main characters, and soap fans are fanatical and absolutely and very supportive. So that year or so we were producing little theater shows went pretty well because their fans turned out and bought tickets. So that got me into the producing, and I did a little tiny 6 kids locked in a house horror film that I acted in, and one of the other male leads in that had a script similar to one that I had been writing for a little while. In our naivety, we decided that going out and raising the money for 2 things would be easier than just one, and that was wrong, but we did scrape together enough to make one of them. And that was the All God's Creatures, which was my first written produced feature that came out in 2011, I believe it was.
So let's dig into All God's Creatures for a second. I want to just take a step back. When you were doing these plays, producing these off-Broadway plays, did you start to write? Like, was it original stuff? Were you write? At what point did writing become sort of a part of your?
Yeah, the plays we were doing was all published playwright stuff. We did like a run of Howard Corder's Boy's Life. I remember we did some kind of just little multi-scene vignette shows. So no, we weren't writing any of our own material at the theater stage. The first thing I wrote, really even tried to write, was All God's Creatures. In all honesty, I can't. I mean, it's been a while now, but I don't remember having too many things that I just wrote and threw in a drawer prior to that. And the development process of that was long. That process started in 2008, I want to say. I started writing All God's Creatures, like summer of 2008, and I didn't even show it to someone until probably early the next year, 2009, and that was Matt, who I ended up producing it with, Matt Jared, and we shot that film March of 2010, so you want to say 2 years of writing and development and scraping together $21,500, if you call that fundraising. I don't know.
And let's dig into that a little bit. Just in a nutshell, how were you able to raise the money? Was it friends and family? You just
All God's Creatures was all friends and family. We raised 21. We shot that on $21,500. The financiers, actually, my self-plug stuff. I wrote a book, a case study about doing that first movie. And if I can recall the page of the breakdown of the money, I think it was like a quarter of that was my girlfriend at the time. Another quarter of it was Matt's dad. Another quarter was Matt's uncle. And then the last $6,500 or so was just like $800 from my aunts, $500 from my buddy Eric that I bartended with. Yeah, just like totally smushed together whatever little fragments of cash we could get our hands on. We surprisingly didn't crowdfund any of the initial budget. We did do a crowdfunding campaign for that in post, but that wasn't part. Yeah, that wasn't part of the initial shoot money.
Okay, perfect. How can people find, you just mentioned this case study that you created, Filmmaking the Hard Way. How can people find that if they're curious to learn more?
That is on whatever platform, e-reading platform, Amazon, on iBooks, what are the other ones? I don't know. And whatever they are, it's there.
What did you do with that film once it was done? Did you find a distributor? Did you do the festival route? What was your...
We did. We certainly didn't premiere at Sundance or anything. We did. I think we premiered at the Hoboken International Festival, just outside of New York, and we did a few others in the New York area. I want to say Hoboken was probably the biggest one. So small festivals, little regional things, nothing major. And then I went out to AFM with it out here in Santa Monica. They do every year, the film market, and it was more relevant then than it is now to physically be at. But honestly, being here really, the story I tell about this, the being at the market really wasn't where anything happened for me. It was the amount of work I did before and after the market and all the outreach. Because really, I'm meaningless now, but I was definitely meaningless then. These people are here to sell and buy things and make money, and my little tiny film was not going to do that for anyone. So getting meetings, which is the goal for a lot of people going to AFM while you're there, was difficult. I had a few, but nothing came out of those really. The company that ended up picking it up, SYS Entertainment, which is they're based in Chatworth. They're a small boutique kind of indie focused distributor out here. Was a company that I'd emailed in my shotgun blast of probably 100 companies. When you sign up for the market, you get the program of everyone who's going to be there, and you can kind of go through, if you do your due diligence, go through their IMDb, their filmographies, et cetera, kind of get a feel for what they do film type wise, the tier of talent in the movies. Are they cast driven? Like, what's their deal as a company for the most part, and decide which ones are good targets. I did that, and probably went a little wider than I probably should have been. But in doing that, one of the companies was this one, and they weren't able to meet at the market, but doing follow-up afterwards. They certainly said they were interested and wanted to take a look at it after the market, and things slowed down. And in doing the follow-up after the fact, they ended up giving us an offer. And we got a little tiny advance, not a lot, but for a $21,500 film, any advance is probably an accomplishment.
Yeah, for sure.
So we were not too disappointed. They got it. It came out May of 2011. So that we shot that in March of 2010. Took us all year to do post on it basically, and at the very tail end of the year, the AFM's in late October, early November. So 8-9 months later, is when that kind of happened, and then we were looking at releasing it. It came out in 2012. So sorry, we were in post all through 2010, and then we did the festival thing throughout 2011. And the end of 2011 is when I took it to AFM. I apologize. And early the next year is when it actually came out in May. So my timeline it's more like 4 years, that process.
Yeah, no doubt. So let's talk about your film, Catch-22, based on the unwritten story, Sania Sagrua.
Shawnee Shakru. It's
Shawnee
Irish.
Shakru. Okay. Perfect. So you directed and edited that one. I mean, you wrote, produced, and acted in All God's Creatures. So then this next step is actually, directing and edit. You're doing all that stuff plus directing and editing. How did you decide to do that? Like, what was the motivation to do that? You just thought I could do a better job than these guys did on All God's Creatures? You just had
no. I would never say that.
Okay.
Still very close friends with Ryan and Frank, the co-directors of All God's Creatures. They did. It is certainly. I mean, this I can say this. When you filter your material through another human being, and have something, and that's I'm referring to having someone else direct something you wrote. It's inevitably not going to be the same exact thing you thought when you sat in that room and wrote it yourself, because it's going through another human being.
Yeah.
So that's not to say that it's they didn't do a good job, or I don't like All God's Creatures, but it did change, and there were things that I probably would have done differently, and that's nothing. That's nothing I wouldn't say that I haven't told them.
Yeah.
But we did. It was everyone. I had never directed anything. I had never written anything. We did All God's Creatures, and they thankfully did have a grasp on a job that I didn't know how to do yet. So I'm thankful that they did, and I think they did a pretty good job.
What did you do to prepare to be a director on this first feature, this Catch-22 feature?
Well, that's what I was actually going to say. The Catch-22 was not my first. In between All God's Creatures and Catch-22, I directed this even smaller than All God's Creatures, a feature, What Would Bear Do? That's like a slacker buddy comedy that me and Matt, who is the other producer on All God's Creatures, he and I kind of co-wrote together. And I shot that back in Ohio, where I'm from, for basically 10 grand in 2013. So like a year later, I was directing something in Ohio. And I hadn't even done a short at that point. And that was a situation where it was comedy, and like what I perceived to be, whether, it's open to interpretation after the fact, but what I perceived to be a type of comedy that I didn't think, I don't even know if it translated when I did it, but I know, or I was sure that it would not translate to anything entertaining if it passed through somebody else, So What Would Bear Do was the first thing I directed. A little buddy, like I said, we shot that for 10 grand, Ohio. It's like literally me, the 5 actors, and 2 other people, basically, shooting a film in the woods in rural Ohio. It was interesting. It was an interesting shoot, to say the least.
And how did you learn how to edit? Did you edit that one as well?
No, I did not edit What Would Bear Do. I had the cinematographer, Brian, edited that. So, yeah, I mean, I guess kind of getting to the point where on Catch-22 and then Love Is Dead, the new one that we have coming down the pipe that I directed, I edited that as well. Like, each time I've kind of picked up another hat or two, usually as a producing solution, honestly. Like, it's an inexpensive way. I sit there and I watch. In the case of All God's Creatures, I worked very closely with the directors. I worked on a bunch of sets between then and What Would Bear Do, and then further down the line, Catch-22. So I saw more people direct. I got a feel for what it is, and hopefully understanding it better. And in the case of material where I wrote it, I'm like, I think that I'm going to interpret this best, and hopefully I've learned the tools necessary in order to execute that, just from being around it, seeing other people who are talented and doing it, and I just kind of decided, fuck it, like let's try it and see what happens, and that's it.
Yeah.
You'll kind of notice that as maybe a theme in my career and life. It's kind of fuck it, let's see what happens.
So how did you raise the money for Catch-22?
Catch-22 was it still was. I mean, people we knew. It wasn't just family, probably for the first time, family and very close friends. But it was still people that, one of the chief financiers of Catch-22 was a guy bartended in New York for a decade, and a bar I worked at for, I don't know, maybe a year or two. He was one of the regulars there. He worked at Pfizer around the corner, and this is kind of a thing. Maybe it's almost a trope of film financing, but most people who fund films, especially smaller films, little independent things, where making money is, truth be told, and being totally straightforward, shouldn't be the chief goal of the business, basically, of the company that owns this film, because it probably isn't going to. So when I sit down with a financier, one of the first things I say is, this needs to be money that you are totally okay with never seeing again. you know? I mean, I'm going to try to make money. I have a fiscal interest in this as well. I would love to make money. The more the better doing this, but I understand that the odds are low, and you need to understand that too. So most people who do finance, smaller independent projects, like a lot of the ones I've done, are people who work in some field where they make an abundance of money and don't necessarily love their day-to-day, or at least are not entirely fulfilled by it, and they want to play in a sandbox that's a little more fun, or maybe even a lot more fun. And film can very much be that, and be a fulfilling thing if you're part of a story that gets told and actually people see and like. I think that is a fulfilling thing, especially for someone who day-to-day works outside of that, And the chief financier of Catch-22, put in about half the money, was just a guy I wasn't even that close to prior to working on Catch-22 together. I mean, it was a guy, if he was in New York, he had moved out of New York by the time that film was happening, and if he was in town, we might get together and have drinks. We went to a Clippers game out here in LA once. We were not close friends, and he happened to, I think I might have reached out to him when we first started raising money for Catch-22, and he was like, oh man, that's not something I have the money to do or whatever. He's like, but I know people with money, and if I see an opportunity, I'm happy to pass your stuff along. So that was like the initial interaction with him about that. And then at some point down the line, he had gotten a Christmas bonus or something, and he was like, sent me a text from a bar one night. He was bored traveling somewhere, and he was like, okay, man, how much money do you need to do this? And I was like, we need X number of dollars. He's like, all right, let's do it. And then that was it. We were in production. So yeah, man, if you want to do this on the long haul, I would say curate those weird relationships that you have, because you never know.
And how do you give folks like that value? Do you include him, take him to the festivals, take him to the premiere?
Oh, yeah.
Like what, do you give him a small acting role? Like what is the value do you think that you're giving this guy?
Yes, 100%. I mean, like I said, you are not selling financial remuneration. You are selling involvement with this process. And in the case of Catch-22, we had Matt out to set while we were shooting in Brooklyn, and when we premiered at the we premiered at West Palm Beach, the Palm Beach Film Festival. We of course had him down, and he was with us the whole week. And so I mean, you want to try to, however you can, whatever part of your job as a producer and if you're fundraising for anything, is to know who you're selling to and how best to sell it to them, and what do they want to, why do they want to be, why would they want to be involved, and find a way to try to at least give them some of that, everything is situational. You certainly can't say like, this is the way that you convince a guy to give you money. Like it's you got to be good at feeling people out, or at least get good at feeling people out, and so everything about producing, front to back, from the second you start, if you write it or if you acquire a property, a script, through every last individual you get to watch it. And then the problem never goes away. The project never goes away. All God's Creatures I still deal with on a daily basis to try to monetize it and give the people that were kind enough to give me money for that first tiny little film as much of their money back as possible, and maybe someday even make them money, which we haven't done yet. So you're always selling. That's all it is. You're always constantly, in one way or another, selling something to someone, whether it be getting the distributor to listen to what you're saying and like it and put it out there, or whatever the market that you're selling to is. You got to know what they want to hear, how they want to hear it, and say it to them that way.
So I'm curious, just out of curiosity, what are you doing with All God's Creatures? Like, what can you do with a movie that's that old? And I actually have a movie from 2009, so same vintage. But it was the pushback I get now when I've sort of taken it to distributors is that, we didn't shoot back then. It was like HD was like the best we could do.
Right.
So we didn't have the 2K. We certainly didn't have 4K. So there's just like a technical challenge that most distributors won't even look at anymore.
I just heard Love Is Dead. Which we'll get to that, whatever. I just heard something similar to that for a project that isn't too low grade, but just because of the way we did it and the style of it, it looks like it would be standard definition, which is, something we can get into. But I just heard that from the distributor yesterday. So, yes, that can be one thing. Honestly, with the library, which is what I call the older things, library titles, you're just piecing things together from anywhere. And a great company that I love, and if you're not familiar with them, Film Hub, formerly Kino Nation, they're a self-distribution minded company that basically you can work with non-exclusively. They have relationships with a million different digital platforms, all the big ones, but a million that you haven't heard of either. Crazy, the China Mobile, like just all over the world, like random little things that are able to generate piecemeal little tiny amounts of money for those library titles. And yeah, they're fantastic. And you basically, put your assets into that. I have literally, over there, there's a laptop uploading right now to Film Hub. Love is Dead. So they're a fantastic company. I've worked with them for years. The guy who founded it, Roger Jackson, is a filmmaker too, so he gets it, And Bid Slate is another company that's kind of like that. They're non-exclusive. They're a little more, they are still kind of just aggregating to digital platforms too, but they also are physically attending the markets, and they're kind of trying to put together a lot of those foreign territory deals that like a traditional distributor would do too. Like you said, it's harder for those older titles to but you never know. And if they,
what's the name of that company?
Bid Slate.
Bid Slate. Okay. Yeah, I'm just writing all this. Yeah, I'm writing all this stuff down, so because I'm going to need to go.
It's good that it has some benefit for you too, instead of me just rambling in your face for an hour.
So let's talk a little bit about Love Is Dead. That's another film you wrote, directed, produced, acted in, and edited. Maybe you can tell us a little bit about that film. What is the sort of the premise or logline to that one?
Well, it is an adaptation of a play that my good friend Shawnee Shakru, who is a real human being, and I guess we really didn't get through that on Catch-22. Catch-22 I did with a friend of mine who had never made a movie before. He was a guy that I bartended with for, I don't know, 2 or 3 years, around when I was making All God's Creatures, actually. He's the music he is a music supervisor, or maybe just a special thanks because he found us the music on All God's Creatures. So he trickles in a lot of my past credits just from knowing him. But Catch-22 was the first formal thing we worked on, and that was we co-wrote together. And that was an idea that we went and saw a movie, Fruitvale Station, which if you haven't ever seen is a fantastic. But we went and saw that together. He was like 6 months sober at the time. And he had called me randomly on a day afternoon in middle of the summer, asked to go see a movie. I wasn't doing shit. I said sure. I didn't think anything of it. And we went and saw Fruitvale Station, and we were walking out of the theater, and that book had just came out, the Filmmaking the Hard Way. And so I was talking about this long form thing that I was starting to write, and I still haven't finished. And he was like, I started to write something once, and I didn't know him to be a writer. So I was like, well, what the fuck were you going to write, Shawnee? Just pitch me. What is it you were going to write? And basically what the story he told me walking out of that theater was the foundation for what Catch-22 became. And like, he tells me this setup, this premise, and I'm like, you're not going to write that? Like, that's a good idea, dude. He's like, I never really got past the title page.
And what was the premise?
Well, yeah, with Catch-22, it's basically these 5 guys. One of them, they're like hard-lived, blue-collar guys. They grew up in Brooklyn together. One of them gets arrested for small-time drug trafficking charges, so he's going away to prison for a few years. And his buddies take him out as a send-off celebration kind of deal the morning prior to the day he has to turn himself in and begin serving the sentence. And the story starts of that day, sunset of that day prior. They've been partying all day, and they're waking up in his apartment, and they don't really remember why they passed out or why, what happened basically. And there's a dead girl in the apartment with him. And so the initial thing is them kind of like trying to piece together what the hell happened, why that's the case. None of them claim to know why she's there, why she's dead. They know why she's there. But so that's the initial thing. But honestly, the long run of it is much more of these 5 dudes finally addressing all this horrific shit from their past that they haven't really talked about are broached because that's just how they are. And this situation is cataclysmic enough to initiate that. And like, I can't even really give you the tail end of it, that really the thing that he said, like the idea that Shawnee gave me that was kind of the hook of it all is a very integral plot point. So I can't really explain what that is, but it was good enough where I was like, holy shit, dude, that's worth doing. And I'm like saying this as I'm hammering things into my Evernote on my phone as we're walking. And we ended up deciding to co-wrote that. So like I was fingers the keyboard on it, but we met and talked about and kind of hashed out plot points, etc., to round out the story to a fully fleshed out thing. So we did that film together. We raised the money for it. One failed Kickstarter, one that kind of worked, and then the crazy bar story that I already told you about my buddy that I knew from bartending for a lot of the money. So we got that one done. And in doing that, in between that time and when we shot Love is Dead, because he wrote that, it's his play, and I did the adaptation, but it was basically just literally I call it a port, not an adaptation. It's literally just turning it from fucking a play format to screenplay format is really all I did. I didn't change anything. In between doing those two films, it was like 6 or 7. He basically started writing. That movie gave him the confidence to start writing and start doing his own thing. He's, written and produced now like 6 or 7 plays in probably a 3-year span. He just shot his first feature. He's been wrote and directed a bunch of little shorts, and he just finished shooting. He's actually back in New York right now. He just moved out here too. He's back in New York right now doing post on a film he shot like a month and a half ago. So it's an awesome thing to me that like this crazy ass going to see a movie because he was kind of freaking out about sobriety situation turned into creating this filmmaking career. And like, to me, that's a really cool thing. But anyways, so Love is Dead, to answer your question there that you asked 10 minutes ago. Love is Dead is an adaptation of a play that he did a couple years ago that he actually sent it to me prior to it being produced, right as we were leaving to go to the Palm Beach Festival that Catch-22 premiered at. He sends me this play, and like I'm like a third of the way into it. I'm like, dude, this is fucking hilarious, man. It's like everything he does is so dark and twisted, yet somehow funny. Which that's kind of what we try to do with Catch-22. It's very serious subject matter, but everything that the guys deal with, they deal with via humor. So Catch-22 is a little bit of that, but his plays are like absurdist, and they're like over the top weird and stylized and dark, but like hilarious, So this was one of those, and I was like, dude, this is, it's basically 3 long scenes happening in 3 different New York apartments. Like, we could make this into a film pretty cheap, knowing how to make things cheaply, which is what I've gotten good at over the years. So let's do it. So we were like kind of already going on that next thing before we had even started or got Catch-22 out into the world. Like literally, we kind of made that decision right before the festival premiere. So Love is Dead is basically about it's there's a loose through line to it, but it's basically 3 sitcom scenarios, like really twisted family situations, each one happening in one interior apartment in New York, and we shot it like a sitcom. So we got this. It's just a stage theater in Long Island City in New York in Queens, and we kind of converted it into a soundstage, kind of. It's by no means a soundstage, and we had a million problems doing it that way, but it was infinitely cheaper than obviously getting a soundstage. Yeah. We shot it 3 cameras. We shot it on iPhones, 6S's, but we did it in a 3-camera traditional sitcom setup. So we had three iPhones going at all times, basically, and we shot the pieces like plays, basically. We shot them in their each individual thing in their entirety, like 25, 30 minutes ish, and ran them as plays, basically. With the production situation was just like, honestly, very similar to the way a sitcom would do it. We did like a whole day of just rehearsal for each of the 3 episodes. That's what we want to call them in the movie. We did like a day of just rehearsal. Just our cinematographer was there, but no other crew. Me and the actors, and then we did a day where the crew came in and we kind of ran a few more rehearsals in the morning for everyone to see, kind of tech rehearsals, if you will, and then shot just some little insert things, kind of just to get the crew warmed up. And then that second day afternoon, we would do full run-throughs of the piece with no expectations of actually getting anything useful. And then on the third day, we came in and would just ran the thing into the ground, front to back, all day long. And that was the production process for each one. And then we would have one day off between each episode where we would tear the whole set down. Our art director, Kim Matella, did a fantastic job of tearing the whole set down and building a whole new New York apartment on the stage there. And then a day after that, we would be doing that first rehearsal day on the next episode, So then in post, we basically, to make it, again, driving the sitcom thing home, we shot it in a 4:3 aspect ratio. We used these Red Giant is the name of the company, these plugins, these Premiere plugins that allow you to kind of degrade and do a million things actually above and beyond what we use it for Love is Dead. But we basically gave it kind of this VHS standard definition worn feel. And yeah, I mean, everything we ended up cutting in these weird old PSAs and commercials from the 70s and shit that are super weird and off-putting. It's kind of amazed. I was actually, in doing the research for that, I was amazed at some of the stuff that the government was putting on TV as like public announcement content. Some of the stuff, I mean, I wouldn't even try to explain it, to see the movie when it comes out, and like, if nothing else, if it's not entertaining in content, you'll be amazed that these are actual PSAs that were on national broadcast television in the 70s and early 80s. It's mind-blowing. So there's commercial breaks. I mean, it's just the whole way with making it. It feels like you're watching a Sunday night like limited miniseries or something in like the early 80s, like the content could never be on television. It's way more dark, twisted, and fucked up than anything any network television station would ever put on TV.
So how did you raise the money for this one?
That one was even less money. We did that for probably half what we shot Catch-22 on, and yeah, same thing. We went back to a lot of the same people that we raised money from on Catch-22 for. Yeah, I mean, one part of it was Shawnee's other half, that his production company, Locked in the Attic Productions. His girlfriend Amanda was one of our financiers on Catch and this. She was also one of our executive producers on both, not just because of her money, because she was amazing in a million other ways. So a lot of the same usual suspects for Catch-22 actually, but a lot less money. So
yeah. So let's talk about Ask for Jane. And this is actually one where you didn't do everything yourself. So I'd be curious to kind of get your perspective on that. You produced it and you acted in it, but you didn't edit, direct it. How did you get involved with that project?
I produced a film that is hopefully going to be doing its festival run at some point next year. Post on it has been very long, but Camp Wedding. And the director for that, Greg Emeta, is in a writing group in New York called Shelter, is the name of the group. And these two women in his writing group, after we had produced Camp Wedding, or shot Camp Wedding rather, were looking for a producer who knew how to stretch a dollar, and that was probably the main thing. Knew how to stretch a dollar. And he recommended me to them. They're named Kate Johnston, and our Cortelu is how she goes now. She has changed her professional name since. And Rachel Carey. and they had the script for that, and they sent it to me, and it is about this group of women in the late 60s, early 70s, they were an actual, it's based on a true story. These women really existed, that were going to school at the University of Chicago, college freshmen, like 18, 19-year-old girls. And one of their friends needed got pregnant inadvertently, unexpectedly, however you want to term that. And her parents were ultra religious. They were going to pull her out of school, ruin her life, basically, if she had this kid, or told them about this kid. And so her friends, abortion was illegal at the time, but it was still happening. You just had to have money, like everything else in life. So this group of girls found her a doctor that would perform the abortion for an amount of money that they could scrape together for her, and then they actually did scrape together the money, and for all intents and purposes, saved her life. And she, she's able to finish school and live a normal life without whatever. And in doing that, they decided that this was a service that needed to exist. And so these young girls installed a phone line in their dorm room, advertised in the newspapers like they were selling something that you could advertise in newspapers, and basically told people in the ad to call this number and ask for Jane if you need this kind of help, or need information, or in this situation and just want to talk to someone. And it became like a big thing, basically. They ended up doing it all through school. Even when they graduated and they moved out to the suburbs, they kept doing it. And eventually they were, because it was legal, they were eventually brought up on charges for it. And by the letter of the law at the time, 3 people in a room talking about an abortion were it was a conspiracy to commit murder by the letter of the law. So eventually these women ended up getting multiple charges. They had like 100 years each hanging over their head, mid-20s girls, otherwise normal beyond their involvement with this organization. And so they went to trial, and it actually ran parallel with the Roe versus Wade trial. And by the time their trial concluded, Roe versus Wade had already came down, and it was no longer illegal to have done what they did. But that doesn't matter. You broke the law when it was still illegal. But between that public pressure of that being the case, and none of the women that they, that the state was saying that they murdered the children of, would testify against them. So all the evidence the state had was circumstantial, and the women all ended up getting off, and they didn't serve they served a little jail time, but basically no actual sentence. Now
it sounds like a fascinating story. It sounds like just the type of thing that would do great on festivals, but it does not sound super cheap. I mean, a period piece, you've got courtrooms, you've got costumes, cars, hair. No question. Yeah. It was, it's pre-release, so I can't say exact numbers, but it was very not the amount of money you need to make a period piece. It was still relatively, it certainly wasn't $21,500 like we made All God's Creatures with. We had some money, but nowhere near enough, and it was insane. We shot that 24 days of production, 73 speaking roles. I think it was 54 locations. The crew hovered around 25 head count a day. It was crazy. It was absolutely insane. The fact that we got to the finish line is amazing to me. The fact that we have a beautiful movie that people are responding to, which we had our first festival announcement that I can talk about, the Napa Valley Film Festival out here. It's playing in November. We have a couple more before that literally the Variety thing will probably be dropping any day now, that are fantastic festivals, and we're absolutely thrilled to have that playing at all of them. We got that, and there's 2 more others that haven't publicly announced. So we're in 5. 1 is announced, and with the way it's looking, I would say there'll be plenty more over the next year, because of the prestige of the 5 that we're in. I think translates well to having a really nice festival run, which is awesome, because I do a lot of the movies I do are so niche, and a lot of cases dark and just
not for everyone, you know, and Master J is not for everyone. I mean, there's a lot of festivals that we haven't gotten into because I think it is very controversial. We depict abortion on screen, which is not everyone's cup of tea. But it is such a wildly topical thing and so politically charged that there are enough people that I think it is their cup of tea, and I think it's going to do very well. But a lot of the stuff I do is not does not strike a nerve with people in the same way that Ask for Jane will and does. So it's awesome to be part of something that probably is more than just a story, you know.
So ultimately, what do you see? Like, what do you want to do? Do you want to continue to wear tons of hats, or do you want to eventually get to the point where maybe you're only wearing one or two? And what would those one or two be? Like, what's sort of your primary focus? Directing, writing, acting, producing?
The thing I do most naturally and probably with the most ease is producing. And I do a ton of that for hire. I do a lot of line producing and production management too, on things that I don't necessarily have a creative hand in. So that's the thing that I do the most. But I certainly love when I am able to tell a story that whether I wrote or helped get from paper form or PDF form to film form, and being involved, whether it be directing it or just working with the writer or editing, whatever it might be. I certainly love that stuff, and I hope to keep doing it. The filmmakers that I most love, the work of are Duplass brothers, Sean Baker, people like that they are kind of do it all at any cost people. They're character driven stories, usually smaller ideas, budget conscious films, things that are just kind of simpler and quirky. Like the Duplass, everything the Duplass brothers touch, I am just like fanatical about. Like same with Sean Baker. I mean, I don't know. Actually, Florida Project was a little bit of a regression in my opinion, but like Tangerine and Starlet are amazing films and so much energy in them, and like he did those with nothing and for nothing, and that's so cool to me. I love, part of it's just because it's not a choice. I mean, everyone would love to have more money, but I do love that when you're faced with the problem of having no money and you're trying to tell this story the best way you can, a lot of times the restrictions can serve what you're doing, as long as you from the start know that that's the kind of project you're making, and you're not trying to fit $100 million action movie into a $50,000 budget. If you're conscious and understanding of what you have from the start, and you either write or work with the writer to tell your story in a way that can fit into what your known budget range is going to be, a lot of those restrictions can often be, some of my favorite things about even that first one, All God's Creatures, are scenes where we didn't have the thing that I wanted when I sat and wrote it in that room alone. At first, we weren't able to find there's a claw machine scene in All God's Creatures where the two leads they're on kind of a first date thing, a serial killer and a prostitute are on their first date together, and in the script, the way I wrote it, they were at the movie theater, and there was a claw machine in the lobby, and like we looked at all these movie theaters in New Jersey and of course New York too, all of them way beyond our no location budget situation. And the whole time we're doing that, we're getting, we were like a week out from shooting, and we didn't have that location that's pivotal and key for the film. And I lived on 108th Street in Spanish Harlem in Manhattan at the time. And at the end of my block, there was a deli with this shitty claw machine outside that I don't think I ever saw anyone actually put a quarter in or play. And like the stuff in it was crappy and awful, and you wouldn't want it anyways. But it was sitting outside, and it was a claw machine, and it was right down the block from the apartment that we shot most of the film in, my apartment. So, I was coming back probably from getting a rejection somewhere to shoot this scene there. And I was like, why the fuck don't we just shoot it here? Forget it. It's down the street. It'll be super easy. We don't even need to get it's right there. We can just pop out one afternoon while we're shooting stuff at the apartment. And honestly, the film is this gritty New York story about these two underbelly people, a serial killer and a prostitute. And if we'd have shot in some beautiful movie theater lobby like I thought I wanted or I thought I needed, I don't think that would serve the overall feel of the movie, as well as that gritty, awful claw machine sitting on a sidewalk in Spanish Harlem, you know? And that only, if we'd had the money, I never would have shot it there.
Yeah, sure. So what's next for you? What are you looking at down the pike?
Well, we have, we're doing the Ask for Jane festival run. Love is Dead is, we are going to probably self-distribute that. We still have a little bit of festival play possibility for it, but we're probably going to self-distribute it, and we're looking at doing that, releasing it on Thanksgiving, because it's about family, even though it's fucked up families. So so we're going to release that on Thanksgiving, I think. And then I have a couple things I wrote. My next writing thing is, a few drafts in, and I'm looking to shoot that back in Oberlin, where I'm from, actually, inside the next year. I mean, I'm kind of still workshopping the script around, getting feedback. I haven't even started raising money for it, so whether or not that materializes on the timeline that I would like is who the hell knows,
Sure.
But the main things are Ask for Jane and Love is Dead, and getting those out into the world.
Okay, perfect. And what did you see? I just like to end up the interviews by asking the guests what they've seen that they thought was really great. Just some recommendations. I mean, there's so much great TV, maybe a movie or something, and maybe even something.
Sorry to Bother You. Have you seen Sorry to Bother You yet?
No, but I've heard it's really good. Yeah.
Oh, God, it is so fucking brilliant. I don't even know where to begin. Yeah, it's so good.
I'll put that. Put that on my list. How can people see your films? It sounds like all the available platforms, iTunes, Amazon, some of these back cataloged films, and some of the newer ones.
Yes, you can go to my website. It's Nyeh Entertainment, NYEH Entertainment.com. And you can find everything there, but they're also all located on, Amazon and wherever you watch movies. They're on most of the platforms,
Yeah. And what's the best way for people to keep up with you? I will put your website in the show notes, but Twitter, Facebook, do you use any of those services? Anything?
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, I have on Twitter, it's at just my name, at Josh Folan. At My Shift Key is Broke on Instagram, and also you can find me on Facebook too. I have pages and my own personal thing. I say it in my book, and I put an email address in there. If you have a question and want to ask some asshole who has done a bunch of difficult things, don't ever hesitate to ask me. I think one of my indie heroes is Ted Hope, and his whole philosophy is basically, if there were more transparency and more of a willingness to help each other, this industry would be a lot easier, because it's already hard, the idea of trying to make it opaque and not giving each other information whenever we can only makes it harder, so.
Yeah, for sure. And that's a great way to wrap up the interview, because I appreciate your coming on and being so candid, talking about budgets. I know a lot of people kind of shy away from that, so I totally agree with you. Transparency and just being honest with people, I think it will make all of our lives better and easier.
Yeah, no doubt, man. Thank you so much, man. I appreciate it.
I really appreciate contacting me and coming on. This is a great interview.
Awesome. Thank you, man.
Thanks, man. Talk to you later. Bye. I just want to talk quickly about SYS Select. It's a service for screenwriters to help them sell their screenplays and get writing assignments. The first part of the service is the SYS Select Screenplay database. Screenwriters upload their screenplays along with a logline, synopsis, and other pertinent information like budget and genre, and then producers search for and hopefully find screenplays that they want to produce. Dozens of producers are in the system looking for screenplays right now. I launched this service at the beginning of this year, and we've already started to see some success stories. You can check out SYS podcast episode 222 with Steve Deering. He was the first official success story to come out of the SYS Select database. You can learn more about all of this by going to sellingyourscreenplayselect.com. When you join SYS Select, you get access to the screenplay database that I just mentioned, along with all the other services that we're providing to SYS Select members. Those services include the monthly newsletter that goes out to our list of 400 producers who are actively seeking writers and screenplays. Each SYS Select member can pitch one screenplay in this monthly newsletter. We also have partnered with one of the premier paid screenwriting leads sites, so I can syndicate their leads to SYS Select members. There are lots of great paid leads coming in each week from our partner. Recently, we've been getting 5 to 10 high-quality paid leads per week. These leads run the gamut. There's producers looking for a specific type of spec script to producers looking to hire a screenwriter to write up one of their ideas or properties. They're looking for shorts, they're looking for features, TV and web series pilots, all types of different projects. If you sign up for SYS Select, you'll get these emailed directly to you several times per week. Also, you can get access to the SYS Select forum, where we will help you with your logline and query letter and answer any screenwriting related questions that you might have. Also in the forum are all the recorded screenwriting classes that I've done over the years, so you'll have access to all of those as well. The classes cover every part of the writing process, from concept to outlining to the first act, second act, third act, as well as other topics like writing short films and pitching your projects in person. Once again, if this sounds like something you would like to learn more about, please go to sellingyourscreenplayselect.com. Again, that's sellingyourscreenplayselect.com. On the next episode of the podcast, I'm going to be interviewing writer Greg Wozniak. He's another great example of a screenwriter who doesn't live in Hollywood but has started to sell some scripts and get writing assignments despite the fact being so far away from Hollywood. We dig into his various projects and how he's been able to land these writing assignments, as well as how he's been able to option and sell some of his spec scripts. So keep an eye out for that episode next week. That's the show. Thank you for listening.